is something unique. You'd have to agree that now
totally.
the impeachment inquiry is underway, sparked by a complaint from someone within the intelligence community. It feeds the president's concern and often used term about a deep state being there to take him out.
Thank God for the deep state. I mean, I think, everyone here has seen this program.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing very well. I don't know whether we have good news or bad news. Is it a good sign that we know more about the deep state now than ever before?
Yeah.
Or is it bad news that they are so bold that they're coming out to the public and just being ordinary people defending the Constitution and all the good things in America? And I'm referring to a recent interview, I guess a couple days ago, on C-SPAN.
Yeah.
McLaughlin and who was the second next?
John Brennan was
Brennan,
next.
Brennan, the two of them. They were both CIA directors.
Yeah.
And they were on for this interview, and it was C-SPAN, but it turned out that they revealed a lot. We're not surprised. We're surprised they revealed it.
Yeah.
And so the big question is, why all of a sudden did they come clean and literally admit, that there is a deep state and their goal is to get rid of Trump. So this is something worth digesting, but there's two ways you can look at it. Maybe they think they're, king of the hill and they have to direct the opinion of all Americans about what the deep state is, because their argument is they're great people. They're the patriotic people. And when you look at Law and Order, it was those clowns that were, after they were disobeying everything conceivable about the Constitution in sorting out the election, this means that they are out in front deciding and to maybe convince the people that they're very important. I happen not to think they're going to win this one. I hope that American people are wise enough, because there's quite a few who have been very disturbed about the action of the CIA people during the Russiagate. So it remains to be seen, but it's going to be in the news for a little while.
It's funny to see them admit this, and it's all a big joke. It's all funny. It's all laughing. Thank God for the deep state. We're getting rid of this guy, Trump. Remember, Pompeo did the same thing at Texas A&M. We lie, we cheat, we steal. That's what we do. It's almost funny to them. And at first, it wasn't that long ago that everyone who said the word deep state was a conspiracy theorist, a nut, a kook, and now they've embraced it. But the Trump people have been wrong too, because a lot of their view is everyone I don't like is the deep state, and that's not true either. There is a thing called the deep state. It was first popularized really by our friend McLaughlin, who I worked with for a decade up on the Hill, and he described something that we'd both experienced on the Hill and in government for a long time, which is a permanent government, a permanent bureaucracy that exists for the sole reason of never allowing policies that they find threatening to change. And that's what President Trump represented when he came into the White House with this talk about normalizing relations with Russia, getting along with Russia, this not being completely in with the Ukraine thing. So this is where the deep state sprung into action. That's what they're celebrating here, and that's what they wanted to get rid of.
The big question is, can they change their image to people who have been very suspect and turn around that they're the heroes? That's what they want to do. And I think of the different times that attitudes have shifted. Under George W. Bush, the WTO was established, and he admitted this is the third leg of the New World Order.
Yeah.
We have the IMF and the World Bank. Now we have the World Trade Organization. But what about the president of the CFR? It used to be the CFR. They were conspiring to undo us. Yet Haas, the president, is on TV routinely.
Yeah.
So it becomes acceptable. Now, I don't know. This would suggest maybe they contrived to do this, and my guess is they aren't too smart. It happened, and they know how to cover their bases. They were trying to, they were wheeling and dealing with the Russians. It didn't go well, so they turned around and said the Republicans were doing it. So they know how to react to a bad situation. I think that may be what they're doing, but I don't know whether we'll ever prove motivations. But the one thing is, they're revealing and they're admitting that they're not exactly patriotic people, though that's what they want us to believe. I want to want to read a quote from McLaughlin that tells you a little bit about their attitude. McLaughlin said, "This is the institution within the United States that, with all its flaws and makes mistakes, is institutionally committed to objectively and telling the truth." So we're okay. They're only going to tell the truth. But then he goes on. In one of the few institutions in Washington that is not in the chain of command that makes or implements policy, its whole job is to speak the truth. I mean, we should feel comfortable. Maybe we should give up our program if they're going to tell us the truth.
Exactly.
It's engraved in a marble in the lobby of the CIA. He continued to blather. Brennan also expressed praise for the deep state and admitted that the goal to remove the president. So they're admitting it. Here he goes. Thank goodness for the women and men who are in the intelligence community and the law enforcement community who are standing up and carrying out their responsibilities for their fellow citizen. So I think what they're admitting is they've been caught. Now they have to spin it.
Yeah.
And this might be all that it is, but maybe they want these things to be ordinary, and it's part of our system. And that's more or less what happened to the CFR and the WTO and the United Nations and anybody who ever warned about these things. You know, they've been ruled out of society, and they were the bad people. And yet here, it's important, I think, people try to sort out the truth on this. This is ridiculous.
And what they're trying to do is wrap themselves in the flag. Just like if you ever criticize a stupid war, oh, you hate the troops, you're attacking the troops. Now, if you criticize a government agency overthrowing a president, well, you're criticizing these brave men and women who just want to tell us the truth. Even though anyone whose eyes do not completely have blinders on understand the history of the CIA, the whole purpose of the CIA to a large degree is to lie, is to obfuscate, is to overthrow governments overseas. And now they're just doing it at home. You know, they're done doing it overseas for now. They're doing it at home. And it's very, very dangerous. You know, Larry Johnson, who spoke at our conference, and by the way, the whole conference is up now, and I'll be writing about this on YouTube. But Larry Johnson was a CIA officer who does a lot of writing now. He has a lot of contacts still in the intelligence community, among which there are some good people. Let's not be wrong about this. But he wrote a great piece, and we have it up on the Ron Paul Institute website, about this task force that John Brennan, who was the CIA director, is said to have put together in early 2016. The mission was clear: spying on the Trump people and carrying out covert actions. A task force is a specific thing within the intelligence community. It has a specific bureaucratic function. It's a cohesive group containing analysts, case officers, those are the spies that do covert action, and support staff. And they operate outside the organizational chart of the CIA. It's a hand-picked group that he put together. FBI personnel were included. And they worked with foreign intelligence services like MI6, Italians, Ukrainians, targeted collection of information on Trump's campaign, covert action like the targeting of George Papadopoulos, covert action like information operations, propaganda. These are the things they were running out of the CIA against President Trump, like him or not, from early 2016 through the Russiagate.
You know, the argument goes that this is nothing new, and I think there may be a little truth to this throughout history. There's always somebody behind the scenes pulling the strings, and this is the modern day effort of who's pulling the strings. It's very powerful, and of course it's the military-industrial complex, it's the Federal Reserve, and a lot of money is involved. So even though there's always somebody behind the king or behind the leadership, I think sometimes it's a lot worse, and I think it's a much bigger deal now, because of the communications and because of the wealth involved and the ability to create the empire. The empire is big. The financial bubble is big. So there's a lot more at stake, and they're very, very engaged in this. So the spin, I think, is very important to them to make people not say, "Hey, these guys are admitting." They were admitting it was always a coup, and yet I don't think it will be reported in the mainstream media on this. This was reported elsewhere. So this is something that I think is very real and very serious, but it's also revealing the truth about people who have been skeptical about it. But it introduces the notion about, well, where does Trump fit in all this? Because why should the deep state be so furious with him? He's pretty good, on certain things, but not good enough. They don't like him, and so they're finding things. But he sort of challenges them at the same time. He supports them in many areas. Take Iran. He's a strong supporter of what the deep state wants. But otherwise, the troops in Syria, he's not so gung-ho about this. And I think that's what drives them nuts, is that he's always willing to attack political correctness and on all the silliness and challenge the people who are the power mongers. At the same time, he doesn't reject the deep state like we would probably go through this and reject just about everything he wants to do, because it's secret government at the expense of personal liberty.
And the question is, why would they do it? And I think there are a lot of reasons, you're right. But I think really a clue is this. This was an article written by the longtime director of the National Endowment for Democracy. And these are the guys who specialize in overthrowing governments overseas. And they've got their fingers in Hong Kong and in Venezuela and elsewhere. But he wrote a piece, if you remember, before all the unrest in this country, saying Ukraine is the prize. That was his view. We've got to pull Ukraine away from its neighbor and trading partner, Russia, and suck them into NATO, bring them into our fold, because this is the best way we can defeat those evil Ruskies who haven't been commies since 1990, but never mind. This is his view, and I think that's the view in Washington. And I think when Trump came out and said, what's so bad about getting along with Russia? He wasn't super keen on Obama's boneheaded idea of overthrowing the government in Ukraine, violence, corruption, the misery that followed. He wasn't super keen on it. I think that's when these operatives went to work. I think that was the key.
But they've worked real hard to concoct a story of the corruption of the Trump administration, not the Biden administration, the Trump administration working in dealing with Ukraine. But the interesting thing is neither the Republicans or the Democrats will talk about the coup, that we've talked about, and how the West took over and threw out an elected leader that was leaning toward Russia.
Yeah.
And that, became apparent, and yet they don't talk about it because that would blow their cover. It would make everything they're doing silly. At the same time, the Republicans and Democrats and Obama, Obama was involved in Syria and all these things.
Yeah.
So that, though, I think when we complain about that, is we're showing why the deep state has been powerful. And because they don't have total control of Trump, I think that annoys them, even though he does at times support the positions they hold.
He does, but he's dangerous because he doesn't hold all of them. And this is the thing. This brings us to this guy Ciaramella. He is the whistleblower, quote unquote, CIA whistleblower. He now said he's not going to testify. I'm not going to go before he doesn't want to be subject to questions. But this is where it gets really interesting. He was a CIA officer who was seconded to the NSC staff under Obama, right? Here's something. This is via the Red State and Paul Sperry's reporting. Remember Paul Sperry? He's a good investigative journalist. He's a registered Democrat. He's a CIA officer specializing in Ukraine and Russia. He ran the Ukraine desk at the NSC staff in the old executive office building under Obama. He worked for Susan Rice. He worked for Joe Biden. He was Obama's point man for Ukraine. Think about that. Right around the time of this coup, he was the guy in the thick of it. He was the guy pushing it. He worked for John Brennan, maybe even on this task force that Larry Johnson talks about. Now, he left the NSC staff with Obama. He was brought back by McMaster. You talk about Trump making stupid hires. He's brought back. And he's working for Brennan, probably as Brennan's spy in the White House. And here's a question. Was it Alexander Vindman? Remember that lieutenant colonel? Was he the one who gave, because it was only secondhand info that Ciaramella had. Was it Vindman that gave him that? Vindman himself, highly partisan. He left the NSC staff himself in 2017 after leaking to the media. He was reprimanded by a superior officer for inappropriate and partisan behavior in the military. And he worked with Democratic Party operative Alexandra Chalupa in 2016. This is Charamella, to dig up dirt on Trump. These guys are operatives. They're trying to overthrow a president.
But doesn't that change the definition of this guy being a whistleblower?
Whistleblower,
I
yeah.
mean, he's not a whistleblower. He's a plant. He's fake. He's a spy.
Yeah.
He's despicable, and he falls into this category of working with the deep state. But everybody recites whistleblower.
Yeah.
And Trump calls him a whistleblower, but he probably should quit calling him a whistleblower, even given that recognition. He's just been a spy to go in and try to perpetuate this coup. Well, they probably philosophically and morally don't think it's so bad. We've participated in probably hundreds of coups in the last 50 years. When you look at every country we've been involved in.
Yeah.
But I don't think morally they would look at it much difference if they committed a coup in this country. If you have a bad leader and things aren't going well, and we don't like somebody, you have to get rid of them. And unfortunately, this is just not thought up out of clear air, because most, I believe, and a lot of other people, I think 60 or 70% of the American people now believe the CIA was probably involved with the assassination of Kennedy.
Yeah.
And that is just horrible to accept, and everybody wants to forget it. I'd like to forget it because it was a horrible thing that happened. But so I don't think they lose any sleep over them flip-flopping and saying and lying through their teeth and saying they're the greatest patriots ever. And I put the blame on the people who believe this stuff. But when it's incessant and that's all they hear on television and on the media, I can understand where if they don't get exposed to anything else, they're going to go along with this. But that's the problem, the gullibility of saying, well, maybe these guys maybe they did some dumb things, but they really were good-hearted and they do protect us and make us safe. But somebody has to run the Patriot Act, So.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Larry Johnson, who wrote about this task force, he said he was talking to an old colleague of his who had been a station chief for the CIA, and he outlined, here's the John Brennan task force, and his friend, the CIA station chief, jumped up and said, that's illegal, and it is illegal. The question is, are we a banana republic where the military and the intelligence functions of government, if they don't like a president, can overthrow? Is this something like Guatemala in the 50s? I guess the CIA was behind that. But is this what we are? So it's a big question. I would just close by saying the problem, and Dr. Paul pointed out very well, the Republicans missed the point on this because they want to have it both ways. They want to support regime change. They want to love the coup in Ukraine because it's bringing them into our fold. They want to love all the things that they do, not understanding that their own president, the Republicans' president, is being destroyed and the coup is being carried out against him because he didn't support this. So the problem is in this idea that we can change regimes overseas at will with no fallout. And oh, by the way, let's do one at home if we don't like the guy who's elected. This is not the kind of country that we want to live in, Dr. Paul.
Legality in an authoritarian government is flexible because the state decides what's legal or good or right. But their definition of illegality exempts the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't enter into it because that's too confusing. Because what would the government have to do? What would happen to the bureaucrats? What would happen to our armies overseas? What would happen to our FBI and CIA and our Federal Reserve if you were held down tight by the rules of the Constitution? They don't want to have anything to do with that. So, but a little illegality here and the criticism, they'll go along with that. But I want to close with making a point that as bad as all this is, that it to me is always a reflection of an attitude, a philosophic attitude. Fascism in the 30s and the 40s didn't exempt in a vacuum. Communism didn't come in a vacuum. There was always some type of philosophic emphasis behind it. Economic interventionism, what we're suffering from now with the spending and deficits and all these problems and the empire, that is defended by the philosophical community, and I refer to, the colleges and the universities and the real smart people in the world. And so the deep state is a player in this, and they might carry this out. But right now, the big concern is what is the prevailing attitude? Do these clowns that call themselves socialists that think that they can have modern monetary theory and print money and pass it out by the wheelbarrow load and it'll all work? I mean, is that going to prevail, or will somebody wake up someday and say this is crazy? I think there are a lot of people because, in a way, when they get way off, when this political correctness gets out of hand, I think, well, maybe this will do the trick and say, hey, this is crazy. I consider some of the things that they do when they talk about handling kids and all this. I think it's a schizophrenic way to deal with all of society. But the philosophy behind the society is very, very important. And that's why we here like to emphasize the whole principle of peace and prosperity based on the fact that individual liberty answers these questions, that if everybody acted responsibility for all their action and that they agree on one thing, they're not allowed to initiate force against anybody else, believe me, the whole world would be different. But right now it's a competition. Who has the most force and who can lie the loudest and try to get away with it. But I tell you what, they've gotten away with a lot, but it's not going to last because there is a limit. There will be a change. Let's just hope that we can participate in making that change to something positive. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.